Black people, let's have a conversation. There's all this talk about, should you buy a house? Should you rent? And I hate that conversation because it's very nuanced. There's so many layers to it. But even more importantly than that, I want to talk about the lack of home ownership in the Black community. And I got some statistic here on my laptop that I want to run through, which is quite interesting. And I was told this a long time ago when I was a little bit younger, that a lot of Black people don't own homes, especially like those of us that have come from second generation or even first generation, blah, blah, blah. And I don't remember, I watched a documentary on this, and they were talking about how the lack of home ownership in the Black community is why Black people also generally have lower incomes, because the income in the family is very unstable. And I didn't know any better at the time. I think I watched this when I was around 19. I had my own stuff going on and I was trying to build my own life. But the reason that this became more important to me is because, 2 years ago, I finally had enough money to purchase my first property, put a down payment on a mortgage. I finally got the house a year ago, and while I was doing that, I was really looking into like what is it like, the housing process, how hard is it? Like, it made me think more about the whole journey I just went on to actually get a house, which was actually quite long. So with that being said, let me talk through some statistics here. So home ownership rates in the UK vary amongst different ethnic groups, but Black Africans and Black Caribbean households experience some of the lowest levels of home ownership. Black African households, approximately 20% owned their homes. That was between 2016 and 2018, amongst some recent studies. Black Caribbeans, around 30% in that same time period. Compare it to other ethnic groups. White households, 68% own their homes. Indian households, 74% own their homes. Pakistani, 60%. Bangladeshi, 39%, right? So with that being said, there's also been a trend from 2001 to 2021, home ownership declined across various ethnic groups, but particularly Black Caribbeans down by 4%, Black Africans down by 1.3%. And Black Africans and Caribbeans are more likely to reside in social rented housing compared to other ethnic groups. In 2021, 44% of Black Africans and 41% of Black Caribbeans lived in social rented accommodation. All right, so this video is not no pseudoscience or anything like that. I want to just tell you why I think some of these things are happening, and what I want to give my opinion on what I think we could start to focus on to try and improve this. So obviously, if you have a parent who came from another country, the likelihood is they're not going to have the funds to purchase property, right? That's just kind of how it goes. Also, you may notice, and I noticed this, is a lot of the times our parents or our grandparents, they come to the UK, they get a job, they start making money, and they send money back home. If I'm having to send money back home, how am I saving to buy a house? It's not possible, right? So my generation, like my mum, she was born in England, but she actually was raised in Jamaica, then moved back to England. So her story is a bit funny. But like, my mum is sending money back home while trying to save money to buy a house. Obviously, I was lucky in the sense that obviously my mum was married, they bought a house together, blah, blah, blah. So they were able to come together and spend money. But a lot of our parents or grandparents, they were spending money, making money, sending it back home. How can you save to purchase a house, right? Tie that with the rise in housing costs, especially if you're in London, it gets even more difficult, right? Then also tie that to where Black Caribbeans and Black Africans usually live. We usually live in inner cities, London, Manchester, Birmingham, etc., where the house prices are obviously a lot higher. I moved outside of London, just on the outskirts of London, mainly because I could have probably got a flat in London, but I wanted to buy a house. I could have saved up for another year, but I was like, you know what? I don't need to live in London. I'm not in love with London, so I'm happy to move out of London. So let's tie that back. Our parents or grandparents who came from Africa or Jamaica or somewhere in the Caribbean, they've come over here. They're probably still sending money back home. I know my mum did, from Jamaica, sending money back home. She still does it now, right? So I know that obviously holds people back. Another thing is we're usually located in the inner city areas. Can't get my words out. In those inner city areas, what's taking place? Crime. Obviously, where there's poverty, there's always crime. So, and then obviously in London, houses are very expensive. In any of the major cities, housing can be quite expensive in relation to salaries, right? Then with that, we've got families where there's no house ownership. So income basically is not the same because they're spending money on rent. They never own anything. There's nothing to pass down to the family. There's no wealth to share with the family. So that lack of wealth is obviously kind of is permeating through the next generation. So for us, for those of you that have parents that have come from other countries, it's kind of our duty to, whether we own a property to live in or we own a property to rent, it is kind of our duty to try and get closer to that, at least 40 and 50%. So my thought process is, well, I'm buying this house, not really just for me, because I live in this house, but at some point I'll probably move. I want to travel anyway, so I'll probably rent it out, whatever. But I live in this house, but it was more important that I own something, because although I don't have a family, I don't have kids, at some point I'm going to have that. That's something I want in my life, right? So at some point I'm going to have that, and I want to have this bit of wealth I can pass down to those people in my life. But I'm not done yet, because I had some other notes that I put down, and there are some other things that I think are at play here. One of them is a lack of education around the importance of finances. So, and this does come again from the second generation or first generation, the people that came before us. They weren't necessarily taught about the best ways to manage their money. And that also affects how they do things. So whether they're taking out credit cards, loans, and credit cards are not bad, by the way. Some people will say them as bad, but they're not bad. But like, there's a lot of things that took place that people just didn't know, right? Money management wasn't a thing for them. They didn't know, they didn't have any financial literacy to make the right financial decisions. Also, they didn't, some of our Black Caribbean and Black African family members, didn't make the right choices. Let me put it that way. When it comes to family and all that kind of stuff, they didn't make the right choices, right? And that obviously has affected finances, the family home, the stability. And all we got to do is look at the statistics of divorce rates in the Black family. And we can see when there's that lack of stability and the union becomes singular, again, it affects the money. It's effing up the pot. So a lot of this takes place, right? Because how do we fix this? Obviously, I don't have all the answers. I'm just making a YouTube video. But I think my starting point is obviously the next generation. So my generation, I'm still under 30. Our generation who we grew up in England. England's what we know. We understand the system. We've got to do more. We've got to do our best to get on the ladder, which actually this is the worst generation to have to want to get on the ladder, but it is what it is. So we've got to do more to get on the ladder. We've got to ensure that we're continuing to educate the younger ones, financial literacy, teach them stuff that the schools aren't teaching them, help them understand the importance of whether you're buying to rent, so you rent it out and make money off it, or whether you're buying to live. It doesn't matter. I don't really care. That's another conversation. But our role should be to teach our kids, because a lot of people my age are having kids now. So we should be teaching them and helping them understand, because they are next. And then it's going to be generational. The reason that the white households have 68% or 74% and the Indians have 70 whatever percent is because they have generational wealth, right? There's houses that have been within the family. There's multiple houses that have been within the family. The money stays within their family, right? When we come here, some of us are only like just removed from being back in West Africa or back in Jamaica, like my family, right? So obviously it needs a few generations for us to build that stability, for us to get the education. For some of our families are only just getting through uni. So like there's a lot of generational kind of things that take place that we have to catch up if we're, there's another conversation, if we're planning to stay in the West forever. You know, we'll have another video for my thoughts on that. But that's one thing, right? So education, 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 teaching people about the importance of ownership, finances, utilizing your money in the right way. I think that's very, very important. Obviously, aside from that as well is we're, we're so tied to these inner city communities. And I'm from South London, Lewisham, right? And I think that I sometimes I think to myself, like, why did my mum pick here? Like, why are we all in these like areas, in these rough areas of London? Like, why? And it never bothered me because I love where I came. I love how I grew up. I love everything about it. But like, why did we choose here? Because I've moved out of London, yeah, and it's proper peaceful. Like, I don't miss London at all. Like, I thought I would, but I don't. And I understand. The only thing is, yeah, there's not much black people where I live, but I don't really care that much. I go into London when I want to see my family and other black people. And I think that we are tied to our inner city areas because that's just what we know. But I think if black people maybe utilize their money in different ways, they'd probably buy more properties outside of London and live outside of London. We can create more communities. There's enough of us to create more communities outside of just London and Birmingham and Manchester and all the other big cities. Like, we can be in other places. And I think that that also plays a role. That plays quite a big role. And ultimately as well, I think it's a time thing. I do think over time, although the data has shown us that for 21 years, housing ownership has declined, I think that that has just played a role in relation to the cost of housing being so high. Like, it's very high at the moment. You know, it's higher than it's ever been, and it's going to continue to rise. And the rate of salaries has not stayed in line with that. So obviously, for us to buy a house now is a lot harder than our parents 30 years ago, because the cost of the increase in house prices has not stayed in line with wages, which is what it is. We have to fight through the times. But I think that those simple things will make a big difference. You know, it'll make a big difference. Or, or we could all just go back to Africa and the Caribbean. Comment below what you think, because it intrigues me, and I've always kind of I think about this stuff, and I talk to my people about it, talk to my family about it, my friends about it, but yeah, like, I want to open a broader conversation around this. Anyway, peace and blessings. Bye bye.